was understood they outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian forces. So when Ukrainian troops managed early on to roll back a good deal of that invasion force, hopes were initially high they could quickly finish the job. It's not worked out that way, and now new reporting tonight that there's growing concern among Western allies about Ukraine's counteroffensive and its fate. In a moment, we'll talk to a retired three-star general for his take, but first, the exclusive reporting from CNN's Jim Shooter, who joins us now. So what are you hearing from your sources about what they believe Ukraine's prospects are right now?
A markedly negative turn, Anderson, and these are sources I've been speaking to since the start of the counteroffensive, but even going back to the start of the war. And expectations of this counteroffensive were quite high, going back just a few weeks ago. But in recent weeks, as Ukrainian forces have encountered really intense Russian defenses in the east and the south, three lines of defensive lines, defensive belts as they're known, with trenches as you're seeing there, tens of thousands of mines. Ukrainian forces have not proven able to break through those lines. They've encountered staggering losses, I'm told, both in terms of killed in action and wounded in action. And Ukrainian commanders, in response to that, understandably have pulled back some of those units to save some of those casualties. And while even a few weeks ago the hope was that over time they'd be able to break through, more recently the assessments both on this side of the Atlantic but also in Europe have been that they don't quite see the opportunity. So that hope has faded. Not entirely faded, but it has certainly become a much less hopeful outlook for their prospects for success in gaining back significant territory.
Way to catch up.
Yeah, way to catch up. It's like forced to admit now the propaganda has run its course. Like, yeah, we were hopeful a few weeks ago. The sources that I was talking to since the beginning of this war, the sources were hopeful. No, they weren't hopeful at all. They knew that this is exactly how it would go. They were just spinning you a line of garbage that you would take to CNN to try to, I don't know, force more money into the military-industrial complex and throw these men as cannon fodder. They don't give a about the Ukrainian people. They don't give a people at all. NATO doesn't care about the Ukrainian people at all. Get your heads out of your... So we had no plan. They know they're throwing these people right into the meat grinder, and they are wildly untrained, and this is exactly what they want. They lose an entire brigades, entire mechanized brigades, just people just gone, destroyed, wiped out. The New York Times finally sent a reporter. Congratulate. Let's give it up to the New York Times. They sent a reporter to Ukraine. Can you imagine that? What's it like actually sending a reporter to the front lines to find out what's going on in this war? You mean not relying on what the Zelensky government tells you? You actually doing your own reporting? Now, you recall a number of months ago here on this very show, we showed you where CNN they publicly admitted that reporters on the Ukrainian side are being kept away from the front lines. You'll recall this, right? This was a CNN report. CNN reporter then says, but we got exclusive access. The government allowed us to go to the front lines. Remember. And they like sort of teamed up with a tank brigade or whatever, mechanized brigade, and so they did like a sort of a propaganda piece, CNN did. But they admitted publicly that no, you are not allowed to go to the front lines to report what's going on the Ukrainian side. They don't want you to see what's actually happening there. So the New York Times just sent a reporter and managed to get frontline access thanks to the Ukrainian government. And here's what the New York Times found in this big piece. Here's their headline. It's not a sprint. Ukraine's Marines insist it's a marathon. That's their headline. Journalists from the Times spent 2 weeks with troops from the brigades trained and supplied by NATO forces to get their... I love this. We spent 2 weeks here. That's all we got. We got to go back to New York City. We can only do 2 weeks. That's it. We got to go back. So let's just kind of go through this New York Times piece here. Some brigades suffered heavy losses in the initial stages of the summer's counteroffensive. At least one new brigade was so badly debilitated from casualties that it was withdrawn from the battlefield to rebuild. They've received 4 to 6 weeks of training in combined arms combat. Just 4 to 6 weeks. As Colonel Douglas McGregor talks about, that is unbelievably.
That's less than boot camp.
Yeah, that's an awful...
Yeah, don't they generally give kids more driving education to drive cars?
Right. 4 to 6 weeks. Most of the fighting has been hidden from the view of the news media. Oh, really? The New York Times is admitting that. Most of it's been hidden, but reporters from the New York Times were permitted to visit several Marine brigades, 2 of them newly formed brigades, that are operating on one or part of the Southern Front to hear from the troops for the first time. So these are newly formed brigades being decimated, according to the New York Times, who spent 2 weeks there and who were finally granted permission to go. New brigades are made up of fresh recruits, fresh from basic training after their...
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Stolen
fresh.
off the streets is another.
Yeah, fresh. This is fresh meat coming in here. Really, really disgusting. Among the people.
In the same way roadkill is fresh meat to eat.
Right, that's exactly what this is. And as we reported here yesterday, we showed you the awful videos, well, we didn't show you the videos, we told you about it. You can seek it out online if you want to, how these Ukrainian soldiers are sitting in trenches next to the bodies of their decomposing comrades who were killed weeks ago, days and weeks ago. And to look at those videos is absolutely, it looks like photos from the Civil War. Seeing these bloated corpses sitting next to they're sitting there smoking cigarettes, sitting next to, that's what's happening in these trenches. And NATO knows it, and NATO is throwing more money into it and wants these people to die. There's no other way around it. They know exactly what's happening.
Can I point out, I want to point out too that you shouldn't, if you have people that are calling in and volunteering, you shouldn't have to throw grenades in their bunkers to get them to fight.
Right. Which is what you're referring to. A few weeks ago, we showed video of a Ukrainian commander who there was members deserting and didn't want to fight and pulled a grenade out and threw it right into the trench. That's how you get them to fight or kill them. So the New York Times went through a couple of other key points here. Some Ukrainian brigades suffered heavy losses during the counteroffensive. At least one new brigade was so exhausted by losses that it was withdrawn from the battlefield to rebuild. New brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine are assembled from recruits who have just completed basic training, according to the New York Times. Ukrainian commanders are pushing recruits into battle and using untested units to launch a counteroffensive. They've never worked together before. They don't know how to run these drills. They don't know how to run actual campaigns. They don't know any of this. The New York Times also learned that Ukrainian soldiers are complaining about the lack of training received in NATO countries, as well as the fact, by the way, so think about this New York Times piece and CNN sort of simultaneously rolling out these pieces about the lack of training, the utter destruction of the Ukrainian military, staggering losses. That was the word from CNN, staggering losses. The New York Times saying all of these people are green, they don't have the training, they are being slaughtered. What do you guys make of this? What do you guys make of these sort of simultaneous media outlets of the New York Times and CNN, which are mouthpieces of the Biden administration and the Pentagon, rolling out these types of propaganda pieces sort of almost simultaneously, 24 hours apart? I'm just asking, what do you guys think?
I kind of feel that this is setting up for the U.S. to say, we did everything right, NATO did everything right, Ukraine just failed. Because the thing is, I see one of three things happening. That NATO planned this all along, they knew this would happen and they didn't care, which I think is the most likely. Russia did something major that was some sort of surprise that then they hadn't anticipated, which I haven't heard anything about that. Or the NATO leadership behind all this is completely incompetent. Which one of those things are they going to admit to? None of them. And so the only thing they can do is blame Ukraine.
Right.
And I think that's what they're setting them up for.
I think that there's been plenty of breadcrumbs to tell us that Western leaders wanted this war with Russia in Ukraine for a very specific reason. I think what's so interesting, though, is that they can spin all this and, newly formed troops or, counteroffensive that would take their land back. They never show you the map. They never show you what's at stake. They never show you what the counteroffensive was supposed to look like. We show you this map all the time. In fact, can you pull it up on your... Oh, sorry. We try really hard to make sure that you have a sense of what is at stake and what they're trying to do for the counteroffensive. Because if in your head, I was talking to a relative lately, and they're like, well, just all of Ukraine is being bombed. I'm like, no, only one part of it is at war and has been for a decade, and that's the contested part. And the counteroffensive was to regain that part, right? And so, can we pull this map up? Was take all of that area red, that's red now, in Russian control, and turn it back to this sort of eggshell color in the center. Regain it for Ukraine. That is area that does not want to be Ukraine, that voted to be part of Russia, that has asked Russia to come and save them from the bombing since 2014, the shelling of civilians. Thus, you're throwing lives after lives right? Now that Russia is there, at the very least, these people feel safer and not being terrorized by the SBU. What those blue dots are there are Ukrainian offensive. And so that's showing you actually where Ukrainians are launching their counteroffensive. The black are areas of heavy conflict. I can't remember off the top of my head what the yellow is. But the counteroffensive, they're saying what that guy just said, only got 4 to 5 kilometers. That's it. So all of those lives, all of that NATO money, how much more? $24 billion more. And there's no way, no matter how much is spent there, that border is going to be pushed back. And if you root for that, then you're rooting for, it's a bug, then you're rooting for the people who live there to be in Ukrainian territory and be terrorized again by the SBU. And so it's a really hard conflict, right? And we need to have a sense of it, not just trust that CNN is like there and the war is everywhere. It makes it too esoteric that you can't wrap your head around if you don't really know what's at stake. And I find it so irresponsible that we never get to see maps in that way. And so that's one of the reasons as we cover this war that I'm so committed to just like seeing what's there so we don't talk about it like ignorant a-holes.
One of the other things the New York Times points out is that they are criticizing, the Ukrainians have been criticizing the American Max Pro armored vehicles that they've been receiving, which are designed to fight insurgents in Afghanistan on camels. They cannot, well, they're designed to fight insurgents. And in the wars that the United States has been fighting over the past 20 years, which is against, guys on camels in the desert, basically, not real armies. Not anyone with air power, not a real army like the Chinese or the Russians. Literally guys on camels. These American Max Pro armored vehicles cannot even withstand the firepower from the Russian army. They're being destroyed. So, and more Bradleys are showing up. American Humvees are supposed to be arriving in the next few weeks. Many of them won't even arrive until the fall. One Ukrainian commander told the New York Times, quote, "I've lost many, and some of the newcomers are mentally broken." That's the status of the war right now. So the Biden administration doubling down, wanting to send $24 additional billion into the meat grinder so all of Ukraine can be totally destroyed. NATO wants Ukraine totally destroyed, and it wants this entire generation of men wiped out so they can do their bidding. I mean, just BlackRock can swoop in and buy up and take up as much of the land as possible and turn it into some sort of aircraft carrier for NATO operations in the future. I don't know. If you know what their plan is, let us know in the chat below. But it's absolutely disgusting that the Biden administration continues to push this. And Congress will go along with it. Don't look for anyone really to push back on it. Maybe Rand Paul, but in the end he'll vote for it because it seems like that's what they end up doing. And then this...
Definitely not the progressives that you thought were peacemongers like Bernie Sanders.
Just in the match world.
Yeah.
Maybe that, yeah, they're the only one.
Russians are advancing with 3 armored pieces. One of it is T-90M Prorыв main battle tank and 2 BMP-3s. On this video you can see that the BMP-3s are providing covering fire with their automatic cannons, while it would seem the tank is shooting smoke shells towards Ukrainian positions, perhaps in attempt to cover their advance, confuse Ukrainian forces, and not allow Ukrainians to directly fire upon this Russian assault. It is interesting to know that perhaps we are witnessing the attack of AVS Tank Guard Red Banner Regiment, which is an elite force within the Russian forces, and if that's the case, this video has unique value and totally worth showing to. This Russian counterattack in a way proves my point that I have stated in my last video. Ukrainians do not have an upper hand here, and both Russians and Ukrainians are battling out for the control of initiative.